with the war going badly, voluntary enlistments dropped dramatically. Congress enacted a conscription bill to coerce men into the armed forces. The reaction to this was immediate. Governor Seymour believed that this would prove, quote, unfortunate as a policy, unquote. He asked Lincoln not to put the draft into effect until the legality could be determined. Quote, I do not dwell upon what I believe would be the consequence of a violent, harsh policy before the constitutionality of the act is tested. You can scan the immediate future as well as I can, unquote. The Democratic Party passed a resolution concerning the conscription bill. Quote, it is subversive to the right of state governments and designed to make them dependencies and provinces to be ruled by military satraps under a great, consolidating, usurping central despotism, unquote. Then Abraham Lincoln's bureaucrats sent New York its draft quota. Horatio Seymour wrote several furious letters to the president. Quote, if the comparison is made between cities of different states, the disproportion of men demanded from New York and Brooklyn, which were both Democratic states, is startling. While in these cities, 26% of the population is enrolled, but in Boston, which was a Republican city, only 12%, or less than half the ratio, is liable to be drafted, unquote. Lincoln backed down. The quotas were more equitably distributed, but the conflict had reached a point of no return. J.A. McMasters, editor of the Freeman's Journal, said that the time for deliberation had gone and the time for action had come, quote, by fighting, not by street fighting, not by disorganized opposition. We should organize by tens and hundreds, by companies and regiments, and we should send to our governor for commissions as soon as the regiments are formed, unquote. On Saturday morning, July 11, 1863, the actual drawing of draftee names began. At 5 a.m., it was already hot and overcast. A long column of citizen soldiers moved from the Lower East Side across Broadway to 9th Avenue, armed with iron bars, bludgeons, and bats. Armed women were among them. Small groups split off and smashed into hardware stores to get handguns and rifles. Another column poured down Lexington Avenue to the Bull's Head Hotel on 43rd Street. This was the office of the American Telegraph Company. From here, messages could be sent to Washington warning of the uprising. The office was destroyed. Another formation swarmed over the Harlem and New Haven railroad tracks. The American Telegraph's transmission lines were alongside. They were cut. Communications with the outside world and the police precincts went dead, delaying aid. Simultaneously, the citizen militia entered the railroad yards and depots, stopping all service. They moved against the major police stations, isolating them. Police headquarters on Mulberry Street was placed under siege. The 23rd Precinct Station on East 88th Street was burned. The 16th Precinct on East 22nd Street wrecked. The 5th Precinct on Baxter Street surrounded. Much further uptown, the Harlem River Bridge was burned to stall federal reinforcements. It soon was obvious to Republicans that this was not a riot, but a well-planned military operation. Navy Secretary Gideon Welles wrote in his diary, quote, there is, I think, indubitable evidence of concert in these riotous movements. Beyond the accidental and impulsive outbreak of a mob, Lee's march into Pennsylvania, the appearance of several rebel steamers off the coast, the mission of Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president, to Washington seem to be part of one movement, have one origin, are all concerted schemes between the rebel leaders and Northern sympathizer friends, unquote. The New York Tribune, a Republican newspaper, reported that, quote, no person who carefully watched the movements of this mob, who noticed their careful attention to the words of certain tacitly acknowledged leaders, who observed the unquestionably preconceived regularity with which they proceeded from one part of their infernal program to the next, can presume to doubt that these men were acting under leaders who had carefully elaborated their plans, unquote. Sunday, 6 a.m., another large body of New Yorkers massed along 2nd Avenue. One section moved against the Union Steamworks, a weapons factory for the Federal Army. It was on 22nd Street. Thousands of rifles were in that building. A second attack was aimed at 21st Street, the New York State Armory. More small arms and artillery were stored there. The police held the armory. 10,000 New Yorkers charged them. The police retreated. To block reinforcements to the armory, the 18th Precinct on 22nd Street was also assaulted and its offices routed. Further downtown, New York's militia headed for the City Hall area and the offices of the Tribune. Simon Gay, the managing editor, saw the approaching force and he said, "This is not a riot, but a revolution." The New Yorkers wrecked the Tribune's facility, but the police counterattacked, drove them out, and the newspaper printed its next edition. 50,000 New Yorkers were now in the streets. To divide police and Union Army strength away from the main battle area in New York City, other attacks were staged in Brooklyn, Staten Island, and the Bronx. On Staten Island, there was an assault on the military drill room of the Tompkins Lyceum in Stapleton. A detachment of 200 took 30 rifles. A second drill room near Stapleton Landing was sacked and weapons taken. Then a railroad car barn in Staten Island, on the Staten Island Railroad, was burned at Vanderbilt Landing. This was to slow federal and police reinforcements. 2 companies of New York's 5th Regiment were diverted from Lower Manhattan to Staten Island, along with 2 federal companies and 300 policemen. At Clifton, as they disembarked, one company was sniped at by citizens concealed in the woods surrounding the landing. They fired back. The citizens charged, took the soldiers' weapons, crushed one's head, deboweled another, and bayoneted others. In Brooklyn, military activity pinned down a considerable portion of the police force when they were desperately needed in New York City. The Metropolitan Police District, which included both cities, had about 2,000 men. At least half remained in Brooklyn as long as a threat existed there. One such attack was against the huge floating grain elevator in the bay off Atlantic Avenue. The elevators had been loading grain as food for the Union armies. They were set on fire at night. The flames were visible to all of Brooklyn. This gigantic blaze drew firemen and police away from the major battle zone. A huge crowd gathered. It seemed they were just fascinated by the fire, but they attacked the pier where the elevators were docked, quote, like zouaves charging an enemy's breastworks, unquote. Police, firemen, and security guards only survived by escaping on small boats into the river. The Brooklyn Navy Yard was a logical target. 4 howitzers were placed at one gate. 4 cannons along the Flushing Avenue wall and more artillery covered the main entrance. Soldiers and sailors were withdrawn from other locations to reinforce this critical base. It was not assaulted. In the Bronx, at Morrisania and West Farms, citizen militia burned the enrollment offices. At Westchester Square, they demolished the telegraph offices, and at William Bridge and Melrose, they ripped up the rails on the New Haven and Harlem Railroad. But the initial clash between New Yorkers and the Union Army occurred on the first day. 50 Invalid Corps troops met New Yorkers on 3rd Avenue. The Invalid soldiers had been wounded in earlier battles and were unfit for frontline service. At first, they fired blanks at the New Yorkers. This did not stop them. They switched to live rounds. 6 New Yorkers fell, but the rest surged forward, killing several soldiers and taking their weapons. Because of the cuts in communications, it took 13 hours for 2 companies of regular U.S. infantry stationed in the harbor to arrive in the city. Mayor Updike sent an urgent telegram to Secretary of War Stanton asking that all New York regiments return to the city from Gettysburg, where they had just been fighting. At the Steamworks Weapons Factory,